He said it like it was fact, like it was just the way things were. Junho, the most powerful man in the room, in any room, looked at his associate and said without hesitation that black women simply weren't his type. Just like that. Casual. Certain. The kind of certainty that comes from a man who has never once been wrong about anything. Or so he believed. And then the elevator doors opened, and she walked in. A black woman. Tall, elegant, devastating. Her natural hair framing her face like a crown she hadn't asked for and didn't need anyone's permission to wear. She moved through his casino floor like she owned it, like the chandeliers were burning for her specifically, like the entire room, the chips, the cards, the men in their expensive suits, had been arranged for her arrival. 3 men stopped talking mid-sentence, and 12 floors above them, behind bulletproof glass, the Korean Mafia boss who had just finished declaring his indifference could not look away. What he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that she hadn't walked into his casino by accident. She hadn't walked in to gamble. She hadn't walked in to be seen. She walked in to destroy him. She was a federal agent, and she had already spent months building the case that would bring down everything he had spent his entire life protecting. Every secret, every wire transfer, every name he had ever shielded. But what happened between that first night and the moment she finally held the evidence in her hands changed both of them in ways neither one had any protocol for. Because he found out who she really was and told his men not to touch her. And she found out who he really was and had to decide what that meant for everything she came to do. Before we begin, drop a comment telling us where you're watching from and what time it is there. If stories about karma, love, and hidden truths move you, leave your like, make sure you subscribe to the channel, and click Become a Member to be part of our community and help support what we do here. The Hukryong Casino never slept. It breathed, slowly, deliberately, the way powerful things breathe when they know nothing can touch them. The chandeliers above the main floor burned gold against the darkness outside, and beneath them, men in expensive suits moved around roulette tables like planets orbiting something they couldn't name. The chips clicked. The cards whispered. The ice melted in glasses that cost more than most people's rent. And at the center of all of it, invisible and everywhere at once, was Junho. He stood behind the glass of his 12th floor office the way he always stood. Still, back straight, hands clasped behind him, watching the floor below with the patience of a man who had learned long ago that movement was for people who were afraid. He was not afraid. He had not been afraid since he was 9 years old, standing in his father's study while his father explained, in the same quiet voice Junho would later inherit, that fear was a door, and a man had 2 choices: walk through it, or board it shut forever. Junho had boarded his shut. The dragon tattoo on the left side of his neck, black ink climbing from his collarbone to his jaw, every scale deliberate, every curve earned, had been his father's idea too. A mark, the old man had said, so that every person who looks at you knows what you are before you speak a single word. Junho had been 22. He had not flinched when the needle touched his skin. He did not flinch now either, when Min-suk entered the office without knocking. Because Min-suk never knocked, and Junho had long since decided that a man who knocked before delivering bad news was a man who gave you time to dread it. The new events consultant arrived, Min-suk said, standing 3 feet from the door, hands folded. American. Her credentials cleared. She's been assigned to the VIP floor. Junho did not turn from the glass. And? Min-suk paused. The kind of pause that meant he was choosing his words, which meant the words required choosing. She is very present, sir. The floor noticed her. The floor notices everything that moves. Yes, but this was different. Junho finally turned. He looked at Min-suk the way he looked at everything, without urgency, without appetite, and said simply, "Send her to the floor manager. I don't involve myself with consultants." Min-suk nodded. Of course. He left. Junho turned back to the glass. And that was the moment, that precise, unremarkable moment, when the elevator doors on the main floor opened and Naomi Sinclair walked into the Hukryong casino for the first time. He saw her before he consciously registered seeing her. The mind works that way sometimes. It processes significance before the ego has time to dismiss it. She wore black, long, one shoulder bare, the fabric moving with her the way water moves around something it cannot get past. Her hair, full, natural, magnificent, framed her face like something deliberate, like something that had decided to be exactly what it was and had never apologized for it. She walked slowly, not hesitantly. Slowly, the way people walk when they are counting things others cannot see. 3 men at the nearest blackjack table stopped mid-sentence. The dealer paused. Even the chips seemed quieter. Junho stood very still behind his glass, 12 floors above her, and watched Naomi Sinclair cross his casino floor with the calm authority of someone who had already decided how this night would end. His jaw tightened. Barely. A millimeter. The kind of movement that only existed in the space between control and the failure of it. He reached for his earpiece. Min-suk? Sir? A silence. 3 seconds longer than any silence he had allowed himself in recent memory. Who approved her credentials? Legal team, sir. Full background check. She's clean. He said nothing further. He clicked off the earpiece. He looked back at the floor. She had reached the reception desk now and was speaking to the manager with the kind of easy, unhurried confidence that told Junho she had done this before. Walked into rooms where she was underestimated, smiled at people who saw only the surface, and gone home with everything she came for. He recognized the skill because he had built his entire life on the same architecture. And that recognition, was the thing that should have made him cautious. Instead, without fully understanding why, he picked up the internal line and said 4 words he had not planned to say. Put her on my schedule. Min-suk received the instruction with the stillness of a man who had learned never to react to things that surprised him. He wrote it down. He did not ask why. He had worked for Kang Junho for 11 years. And in 11 years, he had learned that the most dangerous questions were the ones his employer answered without being asked. He scheduled the meeting for Thursday. Naomi received the notification on her work phone, the clean one, the one with no encrypted partitions or federal access codes, and read it twice. A direct meeting with Kang Junho. She had expected to spend at least 3 weeks building proximity before anyone above floor management noticed her. She had built contingency timelines, fallback identities, secondary extraction protocols. She had not built a contingency for being summoned to the top in 4 days. She set the phone down on the hotel bathroom counter and looked at herself in the mirror for a long moment. Faster than expected, she said quietly to no one. She did not smile. She did not panic. She picked up the phone again and typed a single coded message to her handler in Washington. Contact initiated. Accelerating timeline. Stand by. Then she opened her closet and began deciding what to wear on Thursday. The meeting lasted 40 minutes. Junho sat across from her at a long table in a conference room on the 11th floor. One floor below his office, she noted, which meant he had chosen neutral ground, which meant he was more careful than she had hoped. He wore black again. He always wore black, she would later learn, the way some men wear armor without calling it that. The dragon on his neck was visible above his collar, and she made herself look at it for exactly 2 seconds before looking at his eyes, because she knew that people who avoided the tattoo made him aware of their discomfort, and she could not afford to be readable. His eyes were dark and unhurried. He asked her about her previous clients. She told him. He asked about her methodology for VIP event planning. She told him that too, in precise, confident detail, and watched him listen the way someone listens when they are not actually listening to the words, but to the architecture underneath them, the pauses, the breath, the things that aren't said. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "You're very prepared," he said. "I'm always prepared," she answered. He looked at her with something she couldn't immediately classify. Not interest, or not only interest. Something more like recognition. The look of someone who has found, unexpectedly, a mirror. "Good," he said. "I don't work with people who improvise." The meeting ended. She took the elevator down alone and stood in it for 17 floors, 4 more than necessary, because she needed the extra seconds to slow her pulse before she reached the lobby. The weeks that followed had a particular rhythm, one that felt, on the surface, entirely professional. Naomi moved through the Hukryong with the quiet efficiency of someone who belonged there. She coordinated with vendors, reviewed guest lists, walked the VIP suites with a clipboard and an expression of focused competence. She smiled at the right people. She remembered names. She asked thoughtful questions about the casino's history that sounded like professional curiosity and were, in fact, precise excavation. At night, in her hotel room, she worked on the other version of her day. The financial architecture of the Hukryong was extraordinary. She had known it would be, but knowing and seeing were different things. The money moved through 17 shell companies across 4 continents, surfacing in real estate transactions, charitable foundations, and entertainment licensing agreements that were, on paper, entirely legal. Whoever had designed the system was not just intelligent, they were patient. They had built something meant to outlast scrutiny, meant to bore investigators into giving up. She did not give up. She was 60% of the way to what she needed when she found the corridor. It was a Tuesday evening, late, when most of the administrative staff had gone home. She had stayed behind under the pretext of reviewing event layouts, and when the floor was quiet enough, she moved, deliberately, unhurriedly, toward the east wing, past the point where her access badge technically permitted her to be. The server corridor was unmarked on the public floor plans. She had found it on the building's original architectural filing, pulled from a county record database 3 weeks before she ever stepped foot in Las Vegas. She knew where it was. She knew what was in it. She needed 45 seconds inside to place a passive data relay no larger than a coin. She had 30 seconds left when she heard footsteps. She turned. Min-suk stood at the end of the corridor. He was not holding anything. He was not moving. He was simply looking at her with the expression of a man who has just confirmed something he suspected but hoped was wrong. Neither of them spoke for a moment that lasted much longer than a moment. Then Naomi tilted her head slightly and said in a perfectly even voice, "I think I took a wrong turn." Min-suk said nothing. She walked past him toward the main corridor, and he let her. And that, the fact that he let her, told her everything she needed to know about what would happen next. She was in the elevator when her pulse finally broke through the surface. Above her, on the 12th floor, Minsuk was already dialing. She was in the server corridor, sir. Junho was standing at his window. He did not turn. How long? Less than a minute. She claimed she was lost. The city below moved in its slow, electric sprawl. Junho watched it. He said nothing for long enough that Minsuk shifted his weight almost imperceptibly. Monitor her, Junho said finally. Don't touch her. Minsuk paused. Sir, if she's federal, I said monitor her. His voice did not rise. It never rose. That's all. Minsuk left. Junho remained at the window. He pulled up the security feed on his tablet. Corridor B, timestamp 2147. And watched Naomi walk with that same unhurried precision she brought to every room she entered. He watched her pause at the server room door for exactly the amount of time it would take someone who was lost to realize they were lost. And not 1 second more. He had seen professionals work before. She was exceptional. He set the tablet down and pressed 2 fingers to the bridge of his nose, a gesture so small, so private, that no camera in the building was angled to catch it. He already knew what she was, and he had told Minsuk not to touch her. He would need to sit with that decision for a while. The investor dinner was held on a Friday. 12 men around a table that cost more than most cars, in a private dining room on the 10th floor where the lighting was warm and the wine was older than some of the deals being made beneath the conversation. Naomi was there in a professional capacity, coordinating the evening's logistics, overseeing the service staff, standing near the wall with a tablet and an earpiece, and the particular invisibility that women in operational roles are granted in rooms full of powerful men who have decided, before anyone speaks, who matters and who doesn't. She had learned to use that invisibility like a scalpel. She moved through the room slowly, refilling water glasses that didn't need refilling, adjusting centerpieces that didn't need adjusting, and listening, really listening, to the conversation that floated above the silverware and the candlelight in fragments that, assembled correctly, were worth more than anything on the menu. Names, numbers, a port in Busan, a foundation in Luxembourg, a licensing agreement that didn't quite make sense for a casino company unless you understood what the licensing agreement was actually licensing. She stored it all behind her eyes and kept her expression professionally neutral and thought, 3 more days. The dinner wound down the way expensive dinners always do, slowly, self-importantly, with men lingering over cognac, because the evening ending meant returning to lives that were less interesting than the performance of power. One of Junho's partners, a broad man in his 50s named Pak Sung-jin, whose suit was expensive and whose manners were not, leaned back in his chair and said something in Korean to the man beside him, and both of them laughed in the direction of where Naomi was standing. She didn't speak Korean fluently. She didn't need to. She had spent enough time in enough rooms to understand the grammar of that kind of laughter. She kept her expression exactly where it was. Junho, at the head of the table, had been in the middle of a sentence. He stopped. The room didn't notice. She noticed. She noticed because she had spent the last 3 weeks learning the rhythms of how he occupied space, and she knew that when he stopped mid-sentence, it was not because he had lost his thought. It was because something had required his full attention. He looked at Pak Sung-jin. He did not raise his voice. He did not change his posture. He set his cognac glass down with the careful precision of a man placing something fragile, or something dangerous, and said, in English, slowly and without inflection, "You will apologize to her. Now. Or you will not be at this table. or any table connected to my name. Ever again. The room found its silence immediately. Park Sung-jin's smile collapsed. He looked at Junho with the expression of a man recalibrating his understanding of a situation he thought he had already understood. Then he turned toward Naomi and apologized. Briefly. Uncomfortably, with the halting sincerity of someone who was sorry not for what he had done, but for the consequence of having done it. Naomi accepted it with a single nod and looked back at her tablet. The dinner resumed, but across the room she felt the weight of Junho's attention move away from Park Sung-jin and settle, briefly and completely, on her. And she did not look up, because she understood, with a clarity that was almost inconvenient, that if she looked up in that moment, something would cross her face that she could not afford to have witnessed. She stared at the tablet. The numbers on the screen meant nothing to her for the next 40 seconds. That night, alone in her hotel room, she sat on the edge of the bed and held her phone without dialing anything for a long time. She had been in 4 undercover operations before this one. She had maintained cover through things that were genuinely difficult. Threats, close calls, moments where the margin between exposure and survival was measured in the steadiness of her voice. She was good at this. She was, her supervisor had told her more than once, unnervingly good at this. What she was less good at, what she had never needed to be good at before, was this particular problem. She knew what Kang Junho was. She had the files, the wire transfers, the shell company architecture laid out across 3 encrypted drives in a false-bottomed toiletry bag in her bathroom. She knew that the casino was a machine for moving money that had started as violence and needed to become invisible. She knew that the organization he ran had caused harm she could document across 6 countries and 11 years. She also knew that he had stopped a dinner for her. Not for any strategic reason she could identify. Not to protect an asset or manage a liability. He had stopped a dinner in front of 12 men whose respect was worth more to him than most things, because someone had laughed in a direction she was standing. She set the phone down. This is not a problem, she told herself. You have 3 days. Focus on 3 days. She picked up the phone and typed her nightly report to Washington, with the same precise, affectless language she always used. She did not mention the dinner. She mentioned the names she had overheard, the Luxembourg Foundation, the Poussin reference. She closed the encrypted app. She lay back on the bed and stared at the ceiling. And in the dark of a Las Vegas hotel room, Naomi Sinclair, who was very good at her job and had never once confused the job with her life, felt the specific, unwelcome discomfort of a line becoming thinner than she had planned for it to be. On the 12th floor of the Hukryeong Casino, Kang Junho sat in his office after the guests had gone. The city outside his window performed its usual theater. The lights, the movement, the permanent simulation of urgency. He had watched it for years without feeling it. Las Vegas was a city built on the premise that desire could be commodified and controlled, and he had always found that premise reassuring. Everything had a system. Everything had a price. Everything could be managed if you understood the architecture underneath it. He poured 2 fingers of whiskey he did not drink and sat very still. He thought about the corridor. He thought about the way she had said, "I think I took a wrong turn," with a voice that did not waver by a single degree. He thought about the dinner, about the specific quality of stillness she had maintained when Park Sung-jin left, the way she had absorbed it without flinching, without shrinking, without giving anyone in the room the satisfaction of a reaction. He recognized that, too. He had been doing it since he was 9 years old. He thought about the instruction he had given Min-suk. Monitor her. Don't touch her. And sat with the full weight of what that instruction meant. He was not a man who protected liabilities. He had not built 11 years of operational discipline by making exceptions for people who represented risk. She represented risk. He had protected her anyway. He drank the whiskey. Outside, Las Vegas continued to perform its version of the world, loud and bright and convinced of its own permanence. Junho set the glass down and thought, 2 more days. He did not fully understand what he meant by that. He only knew that something was moving toward a conclusion he had not written, and for the first time in a very long time, he was not certain he wanted to stop it. 17. She found everything on a Wednesday night. The passive relay she had placed in the server corridor 3 days after the incident with Min-suk, pressed beneath a cable housing with the practiced efficiency of someone who had done it in worse conditions, in less time, with more people nearby, had been pulling data quietly for 11 days. 11 days of patience, 11 days of dinners and meetings and VIP checklists, and the careful performance of a woman who was exactly what her credentials said she was. On Wednesday night, the relay delivered. Naomi sat at the desk in her hotel room with her encrypted laptop and a glass of water she didn't touch, and watched 11 years of the Hyukryong organization's financial architecture unfold across her screen in clean, damning columns. Wire transfers, shell company registrations, charitable foundation disbursements that moved money in and returned it laundered and quiet and legal-looking on the other side. A senator from Nevada whose campaign had received contributions from 7 different entities that shared, if you traced them carefully enough, the same origin point. A police commissioner in Seoul, a licensing board in Macau, and at the center of all of it, older than everything else, the founding signature of a man named Kang Dae-jun, Junho's father. She stared at that name for a long time. She had known it would be there. The intelligence brief she had been handed 8 months ago in a federal building in Washington had named Kang Dae-jun as the architect of the Hyukryong network, Junho as his successor, his enforcer, his inheritor. The brief had described Junho in 2 words: fully complicit. She looked at those columns. She looked at the dates. She traced the timeline of when Junho had taken operational control, and then she did something she had not planned to do, something that was not in any protocol she had been trained to follow. She looked at what had changed after he took over. The violence had decreased, not disappeared. This was still a criminal organization, but the specific category of harm that had defined the Kang Dae-jung era. The things the brief described in language that was deliberately clinical because the alternative was unbearable, had become rarer, then rare, then absent from the record entirely. She closed that file. She opened the extraction protocol and began the process of packaging everything for transmission to Washington. Her hands were steady. They were always steady. She was nearly finished when the door to her hotel room opened. She did not reach for the secondary phone. She did not move toward the window. She turned, slowly, the way she turned toward everything, and found Kang Junho standing in the doorway of her hotel room in a black shirt, collar open, the dragon on his neck fully visible in the light from the corridor behind him. He looked at the laptop. He looked at the pen drive in her hand. He looked at her. He stepped inside and closed the door quietly behind him. Neither of them spoke for a moment that had the specific weight of something that has been building for a long time and has finally arrived at the place it was always going. "You knew," she said. Not a question. "4 days ago," he said. "Why didn't you stop me?" He looked at her with those dark, unhurried eyes, and for the first time since she had walked into his casino, she saw something move through them that he hadn't calculated and couldn't quite contain. "Because I didn't want to," he said. The room was very quiet. Outside, Las Vegas performed its permanent theater. The lights, the noise, the city that never admitted to exhaustion. Inside, two people stood in the particular silence of a moment where pretending was no longer available as an option. "The files," he said, nodding toward the laptop. "They include my father." "I know." "Everything. The network, the foundations, the political connections. He built all of it. I inherited it at 26 because he decided it was time, and I had never once been asked whether I wanted it." He paused. The pause had the quality of something that had been held for a very long time. "What's on that drive is the only evidence that could reach him, and it will reach me as well." She said nothing. She waited. "I know what I am," he said. "I'm not asking you to pretend otherwise." He looked at her directly, without armor, without the careful distance she had watched him maintain in every room, with every person, for weeks. "But if you use what's on that drive, my father finally answers for what he actually built, not me answering for it in his place." Another pause. "That's the first time I've said that out loud." Naomi looked at the pen drive in her hand. She thought about the timeline she had traced, the before and the after, the things that had stopped happening when Junho took over. She thought about a man who had boarded a door shut at 9 years old and had been living behind it ever since, managing an empire he had never chosen, doing what damage control looked like from inside a machine he hadn't built and couldn't dismantle alone. She thought about Min-suk's voice on the floor that first night. "She is very present." And Junho's face in the security feed she had pulled. Those 3 extra seconds at the window. The cognac glass set down with the care of someone placing something they were afraid of dropping. She thought about Park Sung-jin's laughter and a voice that did not rise. She looked up. "Will you testify?" she asked. "Full cooperation. On record. Everything." He did not hesitate. "Yes." She closed her hand around the pen drive. "Then I'm going to need you to testify." What followed was not simple and was not fast and was not the kind of thing that resolved itself cleanly. Because nothing real ever does. Junho's cooperation took 11 weeks to formalize through federal channels that moved with the particular slowness of institutions absorbing something they hadn't expected. There were lawyers and sealed hearings and 3 separate occasions when Washington called Naomi to ask whether she trusted the cooperation, and 3 separate occasions when she said yes without qualifying it, which her supervisor noted in her file with something between admiration and concern. Kang Bae-jung was indicted on a Tuesday morning in Seoul. 12 additional defendants across 4 countries were named in the same filing. The Nevada senator quietly announced he would not seek re-election. The Hukryong Casino was seized by federal order on a Thursday, and its lights went off for the first time in 9 years. Junho entered witness protection under a name that was not his and a life that was not the one he had been handed at 26. Naomi was promoted. She received the news in her new office, larger than the last one, with a window that looked out over a city that was not Las Vegas, and sat with it for a moment before opening her email. At the bottom of her inbox, below 3 departmental memos and a meeting request, was a message from an address she didn't recognize. No subject line, no signature. 1 line of text in Korean, which she photographed and dropped into a translation app with hands that were, for once, not entirely steady. The translation appeared. I was wrong about my type. She read it twice. She set the phone face down on the desk. She looked out the window at the city below, moving, ordinary, indifferent to the specific gravity of the moment she was sitting inside. Then Naomi Sinclair, who was very good at her job and had always kept the job and her life in separate rooms, smiled slowly. To herself, for no audience and no protocol, and no purpose other than the fact that she wanted to. And for the first time in a long time, that was enough. If this story moved you, take a moment and reflect. Have you ever been judged before you even opened your mouth? By the way you look, by the color of your skin, by where you come from, and still found a way to become exactly the person no one expected you to be? Or have you ever been on the other side, so convinced of a belief about someone that when the truth revealed itself, it didn't just shatter the prejudice, it brought down every wall you had built around yourself as well? Share your experiences and feelings in the comments. We read every single one. And if you believe in stories about redemption, courage, and truth, leave your like, make sure you subscribe to the channel, and click Become a Member to be part of our community and help support the channel.